Alright, so next let's discuss fishing lines. If you have a fishing reel, you have to have fishing line. That's just the rule. And before we get into actual characteristics of fishing lines, let's talk another thing about these Altoid survival tins, cans, things, whatever you want to call them. I hate them. And I guess they can serve their purpose in an extreme situation. If you're out hiking and you get lost and it's 3 days from recovery or whatever, yeah, it might come into play. But from a prepping perspective, we need to prep for the long term, not the short term stuff like the emergencies. Not saying don't have your Altoid survival fishing can stuff, but you really need to start stocking up on bulk supplies, especially when it comes to fishing. The challenge with fishing, and fishing line is no different, is that you lose stuff. You know, a fish could break off your line, you can get caught in the rocks or the grass or whatever, and you go through a lot of terminal tackle. You can break your fishing poles. I mean, it's endless. You're going to lose stuff. I fished a catfish tournament last weekend and we ended up winning, but you know, we went through 4 circle hooks. Most of them were lost to turtles that we had caught. And instead of killing the turtle, which wouldn't be a bad deal in a survival situation, we had to break off the barb of the hook. So in my Altoid survival can, playing devil's advocate here, in my Altoid survival can, if I have 6 hooks in there and I lose 4 of them, I only have 2 left. And that just might be the first hour of fishing, right? And so you really have to take a step back from those minimalist approach ideas or concepts, see how much junk you can pack into the smallest space possible, and really stock up on supplies that you can use for an extended period of time or becomes an item that you can barter with. If you live in an area that there's a lot of water, more than likely most people aren't going to have the necessary fishing items if an event were to happen. So stocking up on them now is really important. So let's get back to fishing line. There's 3 main types of fishing line. You have monofilaments, fluorocarbons or copolymers, and you have braided line. And each one of them has its own characteristics and can have its own uses. So let's talk about monofilament. Monofilament, and these 2 white spools happen to be monofilament. Monofilament is what, 10, 15 years ago, that's really all that they had. There were some braideds or some synthetics out there, but most people use monofilaments. And if you buy a store package fishing rod and reel, it's probably going to have monofilament on it. Monofilament's a good line, don't get me wrong, but the characteristics of it is it floats, so it's going to remain on top of the water for the most part. It also has memory, which means that since it's wrapped around this spool, it's going to retain the shape of that spool. So as it unravels, it'll be in circular in shape, which is not a great thing, but not a horrible thing either. And it has very low visibility underwater, meaning it's not as good as fluorocarbon, which is nearly invincible, but fish aren't going to notice it as much underwater. Another thing about monofilament line is it has a lot of stretch, and meaning that even though it's a strand, you can stretch it just like a rubber band. Not as drastic, but it does have stretch. So if you're fishing deep water, that stretch could come into play. If you're trying to set the hook on a fish in, let's say 40 feet or deeper, it will have some stretch there, so you're not going to be able to get as good a hook set. If you're fishing shallow, it's not that big of a deal. The next lines are fluorocarbons, and that's what these spools are. They're great lines. This is what I primarily use when fishing is fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbons are, like I said earlier, nearly invincible underwater. Fish is not going to see them. And there's very low stretch. There's some, but not as much as monofilament. And it doesn't have any memory, or not that much memory. And if you see, let's see if we can get it to do it. As it comes off this spool, it's hard to see, but it's not really retaining the shape of that spool too much, and I can stretch it out to where it's almost straight. So I know it's hard to see, but fluorocarbon has very little memory, which is a good thing. The next option is braided line. And braided lines, they're very small diameter for the strength of the line. And we'll get into the test size in a minute. But this is 30-pound braided line. It's nearly 3 times as durable or breaking percentage as this one. but it's half the size of it. All right, so braided lines have very small diameter to test size ratio. They're very durable. You know, I didn't talk about this with the fluorocarbons. This is very good abrasion resistant, but this braided line is even better than that. And it doesn't have any memory at all, and it has no stretch at all. It also floats just like monofilament. So braided lines are good fishing line if you're fishing heavy cover. Again, you have a small diameter, you can wrap a lot of it on your fishing reel, and it will actually cut through grass when you're reeling it in, whereas the other ones will get caught up and usually break if you're stuck in some grass. But with the abrasion resistant techniques of braided line, it's just a great all-around fishing line. So now let's talk about cost. You can go to Walmart right now, and more than likely they have this bulk quarter-pound spool of line. This is 10-pound test, and it's 1,400 yards of line. This costs about $4. All right, 1,400 yards. This fluorocarbon at 200 yards probably costs $15 to $20, depending on where you buy it. So, from a prepper's perspective, I'd rather have 1,400 yards than 200 yards. So for the same price of this, I can buy 4 to 5 of these 1,400 yard spools for the same price as this one. So if you're talking about barterable items, most people aren't going to care, if they have mono, fluoro, or braided line, if they don't have any fishing line at all. Or for your own personal stock. Again, fishing is one of those sports where you're just going to constantly lose stuff. I'd rather have 1,400 yards at a cheap price than 200 yards at a more expensive price. So that's just my perspective on it. I think if it's a survival situation, it really doesn't matter which kind of line that you're using. Like I said, for about 200 yards, you're looking at $15 to $20 for the more name brands in the fluorocarbon series, and then it's about the same price for the braided lines. $15 to $30 depending on how big of a spool that you're getting, 200 or 300 yards. But that's the cost comparison. So monofilament's going to win out in the cost run. All right, let's talk about test line now. So the test line, it comes in pound ratage. So a 2-pound test, a 100-pound test, or more. The test is going to be how much weight it should be able to hold up, without you dropping it and all that other stuff. But that's how much weight you should be able to lift up with that fishing line, pending that you tied a good knot or whatever. For pan fishing, I really like 4 to 10-pound test limits, more towards the 4 to 6. It's just a lot more sensitive at that level. For general fishing, I would say general fishing in a body of water where there's not a lot of fallen trees or grass, 8 to 12 pounds. Again, you want to match that up to the size of fish that you're trying to catch. So if you're trying to catch 20-pound cats, I don't know if I'd go with the 12-pound line. I'd probably go with the 20-pound line. And if you're fishing some heavy cover, some heavy grass, lily pads, heavy wood, deep water, whatever, you probably want to go to a braided line that's going to be 30-pound test or more. But that's the introduction to fishing lines. Please let us know if you have any questions, and we'll get back to you.